Hello, and welcome back to the Healthcare Success Podcast. Today, I am going to cover an extremely important topic, talking about the world of zero click. And Brandon, some of you may know, leads our digital department and especially SEO. Brandon is super uber qualified. To those of you who don't know him, and we won't spend time talking about that today, except that welcome, Brandon. Good to jump into all the details today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So, Brennan, we talk as our team, like almost on a daily basis about how search is changing today. And the zero click environment, thanks in part to AI, but not solely to AI, is really a hot topic in the world of marketing. And clearly, we have prospects we talk to every day, clients we talk to every day about how search is changing. And that's why we're talking today. But before we jump into the zero click world, I think it's important to note that it's been going on for a while. So I'd like to, why don't we start about what does zero click mean? How has that evolved? How long has this been going on? Give our listeners some context about this very important topic.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons it's resurfaced is because Rand Fishkin, now works with SparkToro, does a lot of these case studies and data stories around the world of search, and he has been since years ago when he was part of Moz, originally SEO Moz. And over time, as search has changed, if we were looking back at like 2010, for instance, we were just starting to get images, we're starting to get video, we're starting to get map packs, things like that in the search results. And so that was changing the behavior outside of the standard 10 blue links that we were all kind of used to. And so that over time progressed. Eventually Rand, left Moz and left it in good hands. But he began doing these stories about, what's changing. So after we started getting things like images, right? You would still get traffic sometimes for images. That was what it was, a product someone was looking for. Oh, this is what I want. It's the thing, and they click on the thing. But as Google continues to like evolve the search engine experience, it started getting divvied up into specific verticals, right? So shopping functions and needs different experiences than say healthcare and healthcare searches. Or maybe different than someone just like looking to see where their local like Acme store is. Those are all different kinds of search intents, search behaviors. And so over time, they began to include more and more things. They began to include like direct answers in the search results, where you would get the answer right at the top of like the question you were asking. And mind you, that question that you may have been asking wasn't even possible before, say, 2013 when Hummingbird came out, right? People they were starting with voice search, and so we had to be able to start parsing questions instead of these exact match search terms. So these are ways that search changed with all of this behavior. So within that, if you have a direct answer showing up at the top of the search result, if people got their answer, they're good, right? They're not going to click through to see like what the source of the answer was necessarily. They got what they needed and they're gone. And so that began this whole idea of like, well, where are the clicks going? Are they just staying in Google's property? Shouldn't my website have gotten the credit for it? And you might, right? You might get your link attributed, and someone who's very curious might go through to see if you're a legitimate company in the first place, and then possibly purchase or take some sort of action. As that continued to expand, we got other search features like people also ask. Well, if you start looking at people also ask, it's normally a set of, say, like 4 or 5 questions that show up in various positions, interspersed between the standard 10 blue links, on top of images, on top of video, on top of map packs, all of these other experiences. If someone starts interacting with people also ask, it automatically appends additional questions to the bottom. So if you keep going, it will like infinitely expand. So even though the standard positions of the 10 blue links haven't actually changed in terms of order, there's something else in between taking up that visibility. So In traditional SEO, you might have an equation for, your CEO saying that, all right, well, there's 10,000 in search volume, and then that actual volume gets distributed across all US searches. And so, we're a national company, so we got this 10,000 searches, which is our addressable market that's out there. But then the reality is you then also have paid search taking up those positions. So paid search is going to, nibble away at, I don't know, you know, traditionally paid search was about 20 to 30% of all clicks. SEO was between 70 to 80% of all clicks. And then as these new features start coming into place, it's nibbling away at that click per position, right? So you have visibility. How many eyeballs are going to see you if you're in positions 1 to 3 or 1 to 5? Well, if positions 1 to 3 and 1 to 5 are taken up by paid search, taking up the first three, organic positions get pushed below the fold, right? So that's visibility. So then your visibility is impacting your click-through rate based on position. That's kind of at least the standard, let's call it the standard Newtonian model of SEO. With the inclusion of these SERP features, which often get tested at different positions. In some cases, the map pack takes up the entire spread above the fold. You may or may not get paid search. So what we're seeing is this evolution of Google testing what is the best experience for that user intent, for that information seeking behavior. And so again, what we're looking at is like the equation is changing, right? Because of these new features. If someone was just looking for an image, then they solved their problem. They got the image they wanted and they're good. If someone is, looking to do shopping, and just this week there was, Google rolling out AI comparative shopping experiences. Well, great for the person shopping, maybe not so great if you're an aggregator, right? I mean, that's like your whole thing is like, hey, we could do this comparison thing on our site. We've been doing it for a decade. It really helps us. It's awesome. Great. But, whose product feed is now taking that? Who gets the credit? Who gets the click? So those, I think, are why this is coming back up, especially with the aggressive way that AI overviews has been rolling out. So let me pause because let me make sure that I've kind of given at least some context, some history of like why we are where we are and why this topic is coming back up again.
Yes, absolutely. That was great. And so AI has accelerated this. And, obviously people are concerned about ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, other AI tools that people are using. And we're seeing AI results showing up in search results as well. So, the zero click part has been long standing, but the AI has accelerated that. And you and I have talked about search has changed more rapidly than any time I remember, and apparently you as well. In fact, one of the quotes I saw from Google's CEO warning that search is going to change profoundly in 2025. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about that. Like, what's happening from your perspective in terms of just the speed and AI in general?
Well, we probably should also discuss that it's not technically AI. It's not like artificial general intelligence. It's a large language model, right? It mimics enough to almost pass the Turing test, which, for sci-fi geeks, like they'll understand what that means. But, if a piece of software is able to trick a human being into thinking that it's real, then it's real, right? There's who else to say that it isn't? So, and there's lots of ways to find out about, the difference between large language models and what is or is not intelligent. But essentially what these large language models are doing, they are statistical models that look at the probability of words in a specific order, in a specific topic space, and use that context to try to probabilistically and stochastically in some ways recreate and generate sentences based on probabilities, not necessarily based on grammar or in the ways that those of us who studied Chomsky might think about language and linguistics and things like that. Um, so now these have been around for a long time. I mean, ELIZA was kind of the first one, which probably shouldn't pollute the conversation with a bunch of AI talk, but essentially, you have a large corpus of documents, right, which is easy to get from the web. They process those documents. And in early search, the way that this would work with information seeking is you might strip off word endings like verb endings or plurals or stuff like that. And you would eventually get kind of like the root words, and then you would count up the number of times that word showed up in X number of documents, and that's how you ranked, right? It was this like that's what brought on keyword stuffing and those sorts of practices in SEO originally. But as this natural language processing discipline progressed, it had to solve different challenges, right? In the way that people search. So thus we got changes in match types. It was no longer exact match. We got broad match, phrase match, fuzzy match. And that really isn't meeting the needs of the way that us humans seek information. We ask questions about the world. We don't just blurt out terms. We're seeking things. We're a little more we were a little more progressive than that, right? And there are certain things that those older NLP models couldn't do. They couldn't do disambiguation, for instance, right? Bank. So the word bank, it can be different parts of speech. It can be a noun, it can be a verb, right? And those might have different context. I'm banking a curve, or I'm banking my money. Like there are two different usages in terms of syntax. But it's the words around them that help to frame that context. So it's not. So essentially, there is a probability that curve shows up within a certain distance of the word banking or bank versus riverbank, right? And there may be a specific order that those sit in. So those probabilities help to start defining the topic space. It gets into more complicated math. You have a lot of people talk about vectors and vector spaces. That's basically like turning every word into a number and its relationship to each other in a hyperspace. So now we're back in Star Trek world. But where all of this is going is if in our information seeking behavior, are we just looking for a summary of something? Like, and in a lot of cases, most people are. So these large language models are really good at that. They're really good at summarizing information. They're not so great at real-time facts. That's one way to look at it. Long-winded way of saying, in some cases, the standard 10 blue links function for people. In other ways, they don't. They just fail miserably. Will Reynolds recently, when I was at Brighton SEO in San Diego, sort of SEO conference, he was talking about the experience of shopping for a car, right? Shopping for a car, it needs to fit a family, it needs to have X number of seats. I want it to be a hybrid, right? There's like all of these properties of a car that we might be looking for. If you try to shop for a car, via normal search, it's a pain to do, right? You're like spending hours like trolling through pages of many sites and review blogs and whatever. But if you go to a large language model like GPT and say you're looking for these specific things, can you create a table for me and give me back which types of vehicle might solve my problem? It just does it, right? It's an experience. You got precisely what you needed. So was search actually the right way to solve that problem? And that is a problem with SEO. Not everyone needs it. They may need a different experience. So
I think, Brandon, that when as we talk about this, you and I both love the sort of tech world early adopter kind of mentality. And as this first came out, ChatGPT, we were both playing with this really quickly, and then other models as well. And the sort of where you were just going, the subjectiveness of that. I was preparing for a meeting where I was speaking about senior living, and I wanted to get examples of house of brands and branded house quickly. And I already had some ideas, but I asked the machine, pull that together. And it gave me all three models gave me different answers. One was actually just wrong, but it was helpful and it saved me a lot of time because I could go through the top 50, brands in senior living and try to figure out which ones of them technically had a house of brands or branded house. That's really slow. So by using the large language model, I was able to come up with something that was more subjective. It didn't require me to click through to a bunch of links. And that's, really where we are today. And let's talk about, though, as we've talked about sort of how this works, and we've talked about how this is changing. Clearly, we are seeing the rise in people using these tools meteorically. We're also seeing now on our own website and our clients' websites, ChatGPT, for example, is the leading one showing up as a source of traffic. So that's happening more. Still small percentage numbers, but still a lot. And we expect that to just completely accelerate. So I guess the first thing is, do we care? Like, how do we respond to this? Like, is SEO dead? Is the large language models taking over? Is there nothing we do? Are we helpless? Help me, Brandon. Help me. You have to sort through this.
We're not totally helpless, right? Um, and I would think about it as intent and like which intents are AI overviews showing up for most. And in a lot of cases, what we've seen from the various studies, SEMrush put out an amazing one just last week. And these are all on the trails of, Rand's latest post on zero-click searches. So there is constantly more pressure coming in on the one hand of how much traffic is staying inside of Google's space, right? That's the Facebook strategy, keep everyone in the walled garden. Google's doing the same. They wanted to be the world's source of information, right? That was part of it's part of their nice way of putting their objective. But a certain amount of that traffic has to flow through. It's part of their monetization as a business, right? The whole ad business of the web, it's what funds most of what they do. That users click on things that people can advertise and pay for. So, if I think the scarier thing is just how much of that's staying in that zero-click world. So that means that informational searches are likely going to suffer more pressure. More of that kind of content and intent may go into more of the GPT and AI experiences, Perplexity, Claude, Mistral, etc. It's also putting pressure on click-through rates for paid and organic across the board. AI overviews is something that Google as a business hasn't fully properly monetized yet, although they're testing it. Perplexity has talked about having an advertising model that allows you to bid on the next possible question, right? So there's more probability involved in the whole sequence. So I think in terms of some things that we can do is start thinking more about the user journey. Like what's the tree diagram of the potential questions a person that could possibly use your services or products go through, right? So we're back to marketing 101. Like, what's my fit? How do I help them get to the purchase? How do I get them to get to the sign up? What are the questions and the roadblocks that I need to remove for them? So a lot of it's back to basic marketing, remove the friction points. But it's also, are you where people can find you? And so there's those two wings. So paid search is going to take care of part of that, right? Paid search is typically bottom of funnel, end of consumer journey, right? They're at the purchase, the goal phase. Whereas SEO as a channel tends to function in that spread between there and awareness. And oftentimes functions in the post-purchase part of it as well, where people are seeking reviews as they're starting their journey into awareness. So that's one thing that we can do. Another is, if we look at the traffic that's coming into a website, how much of that is that informational intent? How much of it is that purchase intent? It's going to be more salient for paid search. It could be more salient for display in some cases, or paid social, whereas SEO just has that spread, right? So where do you want to focus your energy in terms of SEO? Is it on site, or should you maybe doing some things that are, a little more about increasing your brand voice? And that's kind of that blend where you get into, paid and organic social meets digital PR, content marketing, right? Although it doesn't play into the large language models directly, the brand mention is important. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, I thought you had a question, Stuart.
No, no,
Um,
no, sorry. Yeah, yeah. No, I was going to say the let's talk about that in a moment. I want to talk more about be everywhere, but one of the things we've talked about is the SEO fundamentals. Those are not dead, and those are informing the large language models. So let's before we pivot, because I do want to talk about be everywhere, but just in terms of the SEO fundamentals, what should we be doing? Is my hypothesis right that the fundamentals still apply, or should we be doing something else? Like what matters today, and where do you see the trend going?
so the basics of SEO for organic search still operate, right? There's there's your technical foundation, right? Is your content discoverable through either external links pointing into the site, your own internal linking, the ability to find your brand. You know, so if Google can't crawl your content via links, it's not discoverable. It means it's not even in the queue to get into the index. And then once it's in the index, how good your content is, how on topic it is, how close it is to solving that user intent of the search to begin with, that determines where you rank, right? So Google's looking at the user behavior in the search to say, great, they had a good experience on this page. Let's keep this one. They didn't have such a good experience on this page. The page load took too long. They bounced back to the search results. Probably not the best experience for our audience. So those basics still hold. Um, Now, in majority of spaces, we don't see the same kind of differentiation in audience intent as we do in healthcare. In healthcare, we tend to see desktop tends to be more research, mobile tends to be more like, I got to solve this now. And so most of the clicks we tend to see in healthcare come through mobile, right? So those are two different behaviors, almost two different audiences on their journey. Now, where this gets trickier for standard SEO is understanding how you can separate out those audiences, optimize for the mobile experience. Mind you, Google's also crawling using a mobile bot to find and index your content. So that impacts both of those audience journeys. So those fundamentals stay the same. It's now then about like how well you're matching those two different intents. And if we know that informational intent could be answered 60% of the time in the search result and not ever get to your site, okay. But did you get the brand recognition, right? That's the marketing side of SEO, right? The visibility, the brand repetition everywhere you can find it. That still works. And it still works for paid as well. It's the informational intent where we're first starting to see the impact. And the AI overviews in this case are summarizing a bunch of search results and then floating that up. And there are different studies about, well, if you're showing up in the AI overviews, you're most likely not in the top 5 links of the standard 10 blue links. So does it mean anything to rank position 1 to 3, or does it still? Right? Those are questions we're still like observing and answering in real time. But that means we need to adjust as marketers to different layers of visibility. So that's where things like content marketing, digital PR still kind of come into play, because large language models aren't built on the same index that Google has. Although if we were paying attention to the moves that Google made just recently and blocking a bunch of tools that were doing rank tracking, that wasn't just about rank tracking. That was about other AI bots trying to use Google search results to build their large language model. So both of those things were going on at the same time. Now, what that means in terms of a shift in the fundamentals of the way SEO works, I think last time we talked about, let's talk about queries rather than keywords, because the query is what matters. Google's breaking down a question into parts. Like it's asked by asking something about a person. So the results that come back or the answer needs to be in the context of a person. You know, uh, that's an entity rather than a keyword, right? So we're looking at a shift between the ways that we're optimizing copy, the way that we're optimizing experiences to fit around that. Um, so every large language model is going to have a different source or set of sources that it's using to build its model. And I think for how we head into this new world of AI experiences and who knows, potentially everyone having their own personalized search engine, like on their own machines, which is possible. It's very possible even now. That changes the game. It's not just about your website as a source. It's not that it'll ever fully go away, but what are the other sources that are trusted by the models? And so in a weird way, it's almost like we're back in like the 2010 years of link building, and I've got to get a link from this high domain authority site, and that sort of thing. Where in this case, it's almost more like brand mention. Is your brand people talk about, is your brand visible on Reddit, and we should all go do that, and then next thing you know, Reddit becomes the least reliable source of information because all the SEOs went there and did weird stuff. I think we need to take a more, I think we need to take a little bit more level-headed approach, right? Are there news sources that you should be a part of? If you're a local business, are you building those relationships with your local radio, your local news? All those things that one reinforce the local authority that you should have, and also the local context that you play in the community. So anyway, sorry, said a lot there.
Yeah, let me summarize some important points to bring us back a little bit. Number one, Brandon, you talked about, and just for our listeners, because you're hitting them with so much, like it's a lot. And I'll try to paraphrase a couple things. One is Google, think about Google. 80 or 90% of their revenue comes from pay-per-click. Like all that other stuff, the phones, the Google Home, that's nothing. It's all paid search. So they're, believe me, we have their rapt attention in Mountain View, to say the least. So what's happening though, predictably, and this first came out, I was thinking, okay, high funnel stuff, really more research kind of stuff, that's going to lend itself really well towards these large language models, where if you're thinking about intent signals, those are the ones that Google wants to monetize anyway. So for example, what is healthcare versus medical? I don't know anybody's going to pay money for that search phrase, right? Like that's really a fuzzy. There's actually I have researched this to make sure I get my nomenclature right when we're doing our marketing, but there are subtle differences there, but nobody pays for that. So those are the kinds of things where I think everybody's pretty well served by just getting straight to a quick answer, right? Or, for example, Brandon, we're going to be doing an internal training for our Healthcare Success University about healthcare for our newer employees, talking about what's a PPO versus an HMO versus an MSO versus an ACO versus ACA versus, and I know all this stuff, right? I've been doing this for many decades, but I need to have a quick answer to teach the employees in the right words. So I went back to the large language models to summarize it for me, to give a little glossary to my team without having to write it all out. Like nobody's going to pay for those terms. But what's the best HMO on Aetna's plan in Southern California? Oh, that might be something that becomes more intent driven. Or what's the best insurance company for health plan or for Medicare Advantage? Now you're getting very intent driven. So I think it'll be interesting to see, but clearly the very high funnel, very just sort of informational stuff, nobody's paying for that anyway. The commerce terms people will pay for. So that's number one. Number two, we talked a little bit about, what does SEO stuff work? And the answer is yes, because the large language models are going and crawling the sites just like Google is, and learning off of these things. So it has to be there. It can't make up stuff that's not there, right? So we've talked offline about what was your thing about organic running shoes, and what does that mean? Like it has to have, it will help a lot if you have content that would help explain that. Because maybe they can draw conclusions, but the more specific you are, the better. And then the third thing where we're leaning into now is be everywhere. And so The be everywhere is what all the people in the industry are talking about. And it is interesting because it is like, in the old days, we talked, the whole Google algorithm. And those of you that follow me for a long time, I've talked about, I actually bought the book about Google's founding and how, I'll just cover this real quick. The whole idea of Google in the early days was the research papers that are cited most often are the most important. In other words, if somebody cites a research paper over and over again, it's therefore important. That was the aha that links matter. That's where that all came from. So links were really important. Of course, they gamed. There's a whole book on this if you care. The nerds do.
Yeah.
I do. But so the um, but so then it became about links directly, and then about citations, and then we talked about how things have evolved and how things were gamed. But just like you said, it's coming back to, in a way, maybe not as much links, but citations or mentions on the web and in many multiple channels. And that's when we start thinking about, okay, how do you be everywhere? And what's the most effective way to be everywhere? So, for example, Brad and I were talking about, before we got started today, about our own content. And it's interesting that, we've had in the old days, tens of thousands of engaged readers through email, and that was all invisible to anybody else because it was all by email. Today, we have about 5,000 engaged readers, but we have more engagement, or at least certainly comparable engagement, on LinkedIn and other sources. So people are consuming our content through LinkedIn, through our podcast, through our webinars, through video, through our speeches. So it's not as clear cut as our website, because our website still matters and all that stuff is still on our website, but we're making sure to distribute that effort. If we're taking this so much energy to create content, we want to leverage that content and distribute it everywhere. And then we have to be very careful which channels we choose, because we only have so much time and so many resources. And so that's what we do for our clients as well. And Brandon, for the uninitiated, maybe you could just share a 30-second message about digital PR and what that means, because I think that's an important way of looking at this. I think you referred to it a moment ago, but some people may not be as familiar with that term.
Yeah, so I mean, in standard PR, you would do you would buy placement for your brand to show up at the Super Bowl, right? Like that's it's kind of part of that, right? And the digital world, it operates in kind of different and somewhat sneakier ways sometimes. I mean, there was the example of the Super Bowl years ago when like all the power went out. The Oreo example, if you remember that one,
Yeah.
right? Where they I think it was Mondelez. They'd had their whole art team over at Oreo daily just putting out a new like Oreo image through Twitter at the time, I think. But at that moment, because they had been doing that practice, they were just ready, and they were just like, "Oh yeah, you can still dunk in the dark." Boom! You would have never made a connection between Oreo and the Super Bowl, right? This is like marketing magic, but like that's a wild example of digital PR. But in this case, like let's say you could be a local healthcare business that who knows, maybe helps with sports physicals or something. How involved are you actually in your community? Are you helping to sponsor like that local baseball team or soccer team or football team or hockey team or whatever? Because again, that's brand recognition. It's having a relationship with the brand. In digital PR, you can make some of those connections, and as well on top of that, kind of building your brand base, building your community, building your levels of interaction through local news, local radio stations, people who are doing podcasts in the local area that are kind of popular and get suggested through whatever Spotify algorithm or whatnot. Digital PR can have just has more strategic reach in a lot of ways than offline PR. So they're just ways of getting your brand more visibility in a way that may be more tied to the local community in which you're operating. So it's a way of connecting meat space to meat space. So MEAT space to MEET space, right? They just can come together.
So and I think this is an important topic that, as we with our clients and advise others to really lean into this and figure out, one of the things that my team has heard me talk about a million times is the 80-20 rule, right? What is the 20% of effort that gives 80% of the results? And that's where we're spending a lot of our energy with ourselves and with our clients is, okay, what are those levers we can pull? And there's specific tools we're using that are expensive and new that help us, sort of sort through that. And new technologies are coming out really fast. So it's a fun time to be a digital SEO nerd right now. And it'll be really interesting, by the way, if they change it from SEO, like search engine optimization, to online optimization or some other term, because it's bigger than search engines now, right?
Yeah, there's lots of people talking. You got Michael King and other folks talking about, do we need a new term for this? I mean, the Olaf Kopp had a survey about it, and possibly right. Mike King said something like, we should probably stop calling ourselves SEO at this point. We're actually kind of a bit more like feature engineers, which is a bit more on the money. But
Yeah.
optimizing for LLMs and SEO, they do still have kind of a bit of the same foundation, right? It is going to be based on content. It is going to be based on you demonstrating expertise. If every other physician has the same kinds of content around the same kinds of services they offer across the United States, does Google or another bot need to index your content? It's up there.
Yeah.
Right? Google even said this in their recent guidelines. So having an authentic voice, having an authentic perspective on the services you offer, I think is going to be a big piece of that.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just to wrap up that point real quick. Optimizing for LLMs, it may at some point come down to like, are you in the seed set of sources that they're trusting to begin with? I think you and I saw some data recently. We're like, that's what the LLM's using? Like, are you kidding me? Got a few of those moments.
That was a little scary. What he's referring to is we're looking at a client, and one of the big terms was off of a pay-to-play pub, and we're like, "Wait, that's not an authority. What? No, you got it wrong. Where do I send a letter?" So,
and some will try to game that, but I think the slow and steady approach of most brands does need to be that case of like, where's your interaction coming from, and focus on that and the user journeys, whether search or another channel. Yeah.
So I was going to say that talking to one of my other colleagues the other day, it was interesting. Their input was that it's kind of like back in the days when you could put white tape or white type on a white background and game Google's SEO algorithm. And their point was that for a short period of time, those of you that really want to game the bots for LLMs, it's gameable. Like when you start understanding what's happening, you can start gaming it. Not that we want to, but it's possible. You're nodding yes, Brandon.
Well, it's possible, but that's also what invoked the next round of Google algorithm updates, which were all penalties. So the case you're talking about now, like I remember when JCPenney got basically delisted from all of Google's index during the holiday season, because some of the web devs decided to put out free HTML CSS templates that were hiding like bed sheets, and some guy decided to use that template for his auto blog, right? It was like really simple footprints that Google was able to identify. And we'll see the same thing. Bing, about a month ago, was just like, don't hide prompts in your code on your website because there were people trying to do that, and game the system. So let's fight against the increased crapification of the web where we can.
Yep. So I've got about 6 minutes left here. So some quick answers here. Should I panic if I'm losing traffic?
Was the traffic meaningful to begin with? I mean, come on, Stuart. We have a page where we get traffic on the website. I think that has something to do with Caduceus. Does that ever brought in revenue for you?
I wasn't talking about it specifically, but yes, exactly.
But it's a good example, right? Like every website has that moment. And oftentimes like Google will just say, yeah, you know what, this probably isn't really useful to you anyway. We're just going to clean this up for you. And they do that in the various algorithm updates. No, so if you're losing traffic, I mean, you should take a step back and triage, like, was that traffic actually really valuable for you? And then go, okay, well, how do we create more of what's actually working for us? What's really bringing in something of value? Now, that is where I would hunker down. Don't panic from the get-go. Um, there are behaviors that we'll need to monitor over time, like how much is your referral traffic shifting from, say, Google or Bing into GPT, Perplexity, those sorts of areas. Um, we'll need to be monitoring, how much AI overviews are showing up. Are they benefiting you if you do show up? And some Kevin Endig was just showing some data, I think, earlier today about in cases where people are showing up in AI overviews and there is a link back to the source, the engagement coming from that link is actually higher. So we're in this time where we're just starting to get initial reads on this, and how we're gonna look to use it.
Good. So last question is, we've talked a little bit about this, but in case there's anything else, to future-proof, what are the priorities? And maybe some of this is recap of what we just described, but just to make it clear for our readers, what are the things, the levers that we should be thinking about pulling now, and how do you think that'll change in the near future?
I think with your evergreen content, so meaning the content that's like permanent on your site about your services or whatnot, constantly developing your brand voice and your individual perspective of your business within those services is going to be critical, I think. Um, in terms of other areas where you may be doing more timely content, like your blogs, you may want to consider just taking some time to plan some consolidation. You probably have some stale content that just doesn't even matter anymore. Just okay, well, archive it, clean it up, give new space for what's new, and what's a bit more timely and relevant. The healthcare world is constantly shifting, right? So I seem to remember recently a good example is I don't remember where this discussion was taking place online, but there were some urgent cares that were starting to handle something like mental health services. It's like, okay, that's really fascinating. Um, so there's going to be these new opportunities that you're going to need to make room for. So I think that's the other piece.
So I would say my last comment on this, and thank you, Brendan. That was awesome. That was really a lot of information really quickly. And we'll have you back as a frequent guest. Today was just such a timely and important topic. We sort of squeezed you into the middle of the program to get you on as soon as we can. But I would say that for our listeners, another way of looking at what Brandon just said is, and we've talked about this in the past, EAT, experience, expertise, authority, and trust. And we talked about Google, your money or your life. And so that's, I think, going to continue to be important. A lot of things we're seeing in brand, just as search evolves too, that brands are becoming more and more important. It's harder for the little guy to show up. And so I would just say that and think about all of these different things, and to remember that one of the things I've told my team about for years is if you're trying to work in healthcare, there's three things that matter: credibility, credibility, and credibility. So I think these things are all merging. The stuff that works offline, if you're trying to influence HCPs, you're trying to influence credit consumers, you're trying to influence Google, it comes back to credibility, 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 or EAT, or whatever framework. But building that brand, building that authority, building that trust is vital. And you can do that through really good content. But today, which is actually exciting, is distributing that content you work so hard to build over many channels and recognizing that the machines can figure that out now, whereas before they weren't. They were really focused on the website. But now it's a broader sort of it's the word I'm thinking of from Marvel, the universe, the Spider-Verse, I guess, of the whole package together as opposed to just your website. Your website is still probably the star of the show, but it has a lot of supporting actors. So, Brandon, you're nodding here. I think we agree. We're out of time. Brandon, that was awesome today. We'll do this again. It's always fun talking with you, both publicly and also when we're talking about our clients. But I thought this was a good summary of a lot of the conversations we've been having lately.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Very good. Thanks, Brandon. Gotta go.
Thank you.
Bye.